let's talk about case cards coming up from the OR. We have turnovers. We want to get stuff through. The OR is done at 11:05 and we're not receiving that case card till 1 p.m. And it's like, okay, now that culture is, see, they're not doing their jobs and, they're sitting around hanging out, and it's just always that negative. And if the leader is the one who's leading that negative, your culture is always going to be negative inside both departments, and that's not good.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal to help you fight dirty. Every instrument, every time. Whether you are tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go Beyond Clean.
This week on Beyond Clean, we speak with Jason Pacino, Operations Manager at Highland Hospital in New York. Today we're going to be talking about culture, instrumental culture, and the impact it has on instrument safety and quality. Bobby, I've got a feeling this is going to have a lot of practical takeaways because no matter where you are, no matter what context, we've all got cultures that we're dealing with. They're either good, bad, or halfway in between, but we're in the middle of them. You can't do sterile processing without it. What are you looking forward to in today's conversation?
Well, Hank, you talk about it being super practical. In some sense, looking from the outside in, it kind of feels like we're taking a sidestep from our theme today, investing in instrument safety, and we're going to talk about culture. What's that about? But I know, having been through it, and I'm sure Jason's going to share a lot with us as well, how many trickle-down effects there are when you build a strong culture between sterile processing and their customers. And so I'm looking forward to hearing what are some of those trickle-down effects in Jason's department that have come from doing the hard labor of building a strong collaborative culture with their customers.
All right. We'll be right back with Jason Pacino from Highland Hospital after a short break.
I'm Justin Poulin.
And I'm Hank Balch.
From the 17 studios, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
And joining us now is Jason Pacino, Operations Manager, Sterile Processing at Highland Hospital in New York. Welcome to the Beyond Clean podcast again, Jason. Good to have you back.
Thanks for having me back. How is everyone doing today?
Yeah, doing good, doing a little bit better now that we're talking to you today. And hopefully by the end, some inspiration. In the introduction to this podcast, we've got a little line in there that says, if you're tuning in for innovation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And I think this is going to be maybe a little bit of both, but I think a little bit more of that inspiration part. So we're really looking forward to getting into the topic with you today. Even though you've been with us before, I don't want to kid myself. I know not everyone listens to every episode of Beyond Clean, even though you should. Please introduce yourself and give a little bit of background for who you are, how you got into the industry, and then we'll jump into the topic.
Well, I've been the operations manager at Highland for about 3.5 years now. Before that, I worked at the University of Rochester as a sterile processing tech for a few years. And before that, I worked in PACU for 10 years at the Level 1 Trauma Center. And the moment I got into sterile processing, I knew this was for me. Something about being able to, the helping hands and the unsung heroes, that it just resonated with me. And I knew that I had to keep this passion going. And I got the opportunity. Somebody threw me a bone, to be honest. I really didn't have all the requirements to be a manager, but someone felt my passion behind it and it gave me my chance. And I've been running with it ever since.
I think a lot of us feel that way for that first opportunity. We're like, we're not qualified. We're not worthy. We're not worthy. But to have someone believe in us it not only changes your career, but it really, at least for me, like it changed the way that I led everyone else around me, because I realized the impact that opportunity had on me in my life and my drive and my passion. And yeah, like I made it my goal to try to do that for every single person on my team that wanted to grow, to really get creative about finding ways. And because they're your people, you're going to take a bet on them. Yeah, it's been an exciting experience for sure. And I appreciate you sharing that in the intro here. That kind of ties in, honestly, to the topic of this episode. We're going to be talking about instrumental culture, that growth, that confidence, that comes in from the leadership, but then goes all the way down to the very front lines, the newest employee to the most experienced team member. All of this kind of comes into play, but it's not just in sterile processing. It kind of bleeds over into all the other partners that we have across surgical services, in the operating room, in the clinics, etc. So let's start there. In your opinion, why is collaboration and culture often so hard to build between these teams? Why is it such a cliche that we tend to hate each other sometimes?
So for me, that culture, it's hard to break, the past culture of sterile processing. Everybody kind of not so much looked down on us, but nobody knew who we were. We didn't have a face in there. And, there's a lot of finger pointing in the beginning. And it's, some hospitals probably still have that finger pointing of, if there's a mistake, sterile processing's fault. Tray's not ready, sterile processing's fault. And to build that team to there, you need the people to actually believe in you and buy into that. And it starts with the nurses and the doctors. Once you get the doctors to buy in on it as well, that in the room reaction of not having something ready isn't always automatically jump down the throat of sterile processing. It is, okay, what happened and how can we make that better? And to get to that culture is taking a long time. I've been here for 3 years. I walked into a great culture to start with, and it has only gotten better. But, there's other hospitals out there that don't have that culture, and it is very hard for them to build it because nursing doesn't believe that we can be successful. And it's not so much nursing, it's showing them that we can be successful. And once they believe in that, that's when you'll start to see the change.
So, Jason, what would you say then is the primary obstacle that keeps sterile processing departments from making that change and building that relationship with the OR, just on a practical level? Why is it so widespread that we hear this bad culture issue between these two departments?
So, for me, it's, that it's us, and for me and SPD, we have to deliver. And, I preach that to my staff is once we deliver our expectations every single time, we tell them we're going to have this tray ready at 2.5 hours or 3 hours, and we deliver that and we consistently deliver that. For me, that is what helps with that culture shift of that, because now they're starting to believe in us. They're saying, okay, they're telling me this time and they're hitting that mark every single time. So it'll start to do that. Our turnover process is one of the first things that we care about is, that doctor needs that tray flipped over from first to third, and we delivering that for them every time. They'll start to believe that. And sometimes that's just not possible with sterile processings in other hospitals. They don't have enough people. They don't have enough staff. The equipment's not always working properly, and it holds those hiccups. And that's what changes that, that culture turns into SPD's not delivering. That's their fault. Or it is SPD. How do we get them to make sure we get our supplies? And then it turns into, let's start flashing for me. They can't get it. Let's just flash it. So I'm not sure if that totally answered, but that's, kind of what we see.
For sure. Yeah. And I think it does. I think where the frustration sometimes comes from is you have these departments that are getting blamed for things outside of their control. And it sounds like what you're saying is let's control the pieces that we can control. And whenever we show some consistent performance in those arenas, it begins to earn us the trust to have discussions about those things that truly are outside of our control. Would you say that summarizes it well?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, and it goes on both ways, because one of our big pushes with that and the impact of the instruments and how we turn over is how do we receive them into decontam? How many hospitals out there, their decontam receives them and there's bioburden completely covering all the trays, or there's 3 trays and they're mixed between 3 different pans and we have to go sort them, and it slows down the process of it. And that is a huge issue. We lose instruments all the time because of that, or broken instruments because they're just not placed back into the proper container. That is one of those issues that people don't see and how it affects the next step. That little stuff will help that relationship. We see, okay, they did a great job on point of use cleaning. That's awesome for us. It makes our job easier. And it also, keeps that relationship with the OR even better. It's like, hey, they're doing their half. We're doing our half. It's one team.
It's really tempting, though, as you outline for teams and I'd say like new and old leaders alike to look at everything that's not being done by the other team and say, that's why we can't do our job, is because they're not pre-cleaning, is because they're throwing away instruments, is because they're doing this. But I really like what you said earlier, that ultimately you got to start in your own department. You got to own all the things that you can possibly own and get those fixed first. Like I used to say, like I went to seminary in my grad school, and so I use a lot of like biblical kind of religious allusions. But I say judgment begins at the house of the Lord. Like we're starting here first. We're getting our house in order before we're going to try to start holding anyone else accountable. Exactly because of what you said. If you're not fulfilling your commitment to the customer, they're going to constantly be pointing to you and saying, hey, Jason, like you told me that you're going to have these trays on time, or you told me that these things are going to be complete. If you're not ever meeting that, then yeah, they're going to be like, well, if you're lying to me about the quality that I'm getting, why am I going to take some extra time to do the pre-treatment or to put the instruments back in the same trays? And it's really a cycle that unless someone breaks it and says, okay, we're starting here, this is where the change is going to start in SPD because you can control that again, then you start that kind of restructuring of the whole process where everyone starts to trust each other. And I just really appreciated that. So you mentioned flashing or IUS as one of the impacts of bad culture. Like, is there anything else that sticks out in your experience where you can see, like, when that trust breaks down, these are the other kind of ripple effects that you see?
Absolutely. I mean, just talking about with the trust of delivering trays and stuff like that, or, how often do they want to open an emergency cart? Because for us, for SPD, we're on the same floor, but for one of the rooms, we're almost a quarter of a mile away. They don't trust us to get that stuff to them. They'll just open up an emergency cart, or they'll just grab something off their next case and not tell anybody. And then it turns into, we still think you have that instrument and it's no longer there. So we see stuff like that. And then the next case doesn't have that instrument because there was no communication. We see things like that, or we have situations where that relationship is, they're not waiting for us. They're just going to make decisions without talking to us. They're opening trays that don't need to be opened just because they want to see what's inside trays, and stuff like that is, that ripple effect of that, not having the trust with each other and that communication. Communication is something that is very big. We do a lot of communication at Highland here with the OR and SPD. I have another manager who's inside the department, and he goes into every room every single day talking to them. And when that doesn't happen, they're immediately, hey, what's different? Where's my help? Where's this? Where's that?
And it's like, where's Johnny at?
Yeah. And, they're used to stuff like that. And when that doesn't happen, processes break down as well. And it causes issues on the back end. And it also keeps the culture going in the right direction. They see our faces. We round down in the OR every single day, multiple times a day, so that they can see our faces. That was one of the first things I wanted to do when I got there, is see my face. So that if I'm walking in the hallway and you had an issue with SPD, you could stop me right in that hallway because you know my name, you know my role, all of that, and I can relate it right back to them. So that was one of the big things is that culture of that is, how can we be together like that? And if it doesn't, you see the ripple effects of it, flashing, delaying of cases, case cancellations, stuff like that,
I know you kind of talked about the positive impact that a leader can play in changing the culture, right? Like just being visible. I think that's a theme that has come up on a couple of podcasts in the past. People really underestimate. And let me tell you, in a broken culture, in a broken process where quality is in question, it's hard as a leader to want to show your face in that context, because it's like, hey, Hank, we had a lot of issues this morning again, and you just do that again and again and again until finally you reach that breaking point of, hey, it was better today than it was the day before. And eventually it does get better, but it's really hard on those early days to even just want to go, because there's going to be problems, there's going to be complaints, there's going to be issues. And I really appreciate you in that encouragement, right? And just saying, hey, like, do that hard thing at the beginning, get visible, especially early on in your kind of growth process out of a broken culture. But I want to kind of flip this around. What are the bad things that can happen if a leader is not leading well? There's a fact like leading negatively, kind of contributing to this broken culture. Like, in what ways can that happen, and what impact does that have?
It's, that turns into finger pointing. You'll see, hey, this is the OR's fault, and this is SPD's fault. And when the leader starts doing that and immediately pointing the fingers at a nurse, hey, this nurse didn't do that. The way this pre-cleaned, they're not pre-cleaning their instruments, or the OR on the other side is they're not doing a good enough job in SPD making sure our tray's on time. It creates that I don't want to come to work culture. People will start calling in. People won't actually, the quality of our trays may not be as good anymore of how we're making sure we're best for patient, such as, that they're in decontam and, pointing the finger at the OR because they're not doing a good job pre-cleaning. Well, now are they going to do a good enough job in the trays that they're cleaning in decontam? So now does that slow down that process of that, making people, now it has to be re-cleaned again because they didn't do a good enough job inside decontam to make sure it was clean because the OR didn't do that job either. And SPD starts pointing that finger. Well, then you get new employees come in. And what's that first day? They're meeting there and they're hearing you bashing the OR, or a new OR employee. They're hearing you bashing SPD. The thought process is automatically negative, negative, negative. And how do you change that? The first thing that somebody thinks about the other department is negative. We're never going to be successful. The first thing is a brand new employee they hear is, oh man, this sterile processing is just so terrible. We have trays being missing. All of our instruments are gone. Most of our trays don't have indicators in it. We're having a huge hole issue. Or, the opposite way, when you're training through decontam and you're sitting there with a brand new employee and your preceptor's telling you, hey, this is the regular, always the OR doesn't pre-clean. The OR doesn't do this. How about, let's talk about case carts coming up from the OR. We have turnovers. We want to get stuff through. The OR is done at 11:05 and we're not receiving that case cart till 1 p.m. And it's like, okay, now that culture is, see, they're not doing their jobs and, they're sitting around hanging out, and it's just always that negative. And if the leader is the one who's leading that negative, your culture is always going to be negative inside both departments. And that's not good. You want to keep that positive culture. You want that new employee to think positive the moment they stepped in the floor, and they need to hear that right from the leadership. And then it goes down to your tech 3s, your tech 2s, the people who have been there a while. They need to be also that positive leader. If the leader starts out negative, the next person's going to be negative, and then all you're going to have is negative inside your department. And then you cannot change that. No matter what you do, you cannot change that.
Absolutely. And Hank and I often call that informal training. You have written down in your competencies and in your orientation programs all of the things that we need to communicate to this new employee from a technical standpoint. That's your formal training. But that informal training is, how long do we actually take our breaks for? We know it's on paper, but like, how long do we actually take it? Or just that
Bobby,
crumbling about like,
man, you are out there now.
Right. I was like, how are things actually in the department? When I interviewed, the leader said, we've got this great staff where you're going to fit in great. We do a lot of exciting things here, but then you get into that orientation and your preceptor's grumbling about the culture in the department or the OR. And like you said, it's those leaders who really do set the thermostat for the culture in the department. It definitely has a trickle down effect. You can feel it when you walk into the department. I want to ask a related question to that. Instead of just the leaders, for our frontline users out there who are listening in, what kind of impact, either good or bad, can an employee have at the frontline level on the culture in the department?
They can have a major impact. I have seen in different departments going around areas, but I've also seen it as, especially as the preceptors. If they are that negative impact right away on a brand new employee, they're the ones that culture, they can change and shift that person and mold that person. And if they don't get the chance to actually see the positive of what we do and they only hear the negative, they're not going to want to come to work. That's the first thing they do. And those frontline workers, I know I talk about it all the time to my staff, is, talk about the SPD, the leadership level of SPD and the OR. We don't point fingers at each other here. We collaborate. And I tell my new employees that we'll sit in meetings and there's no finger pointing. But, at low level or frontline levels between nurses and scrub techs and SPDs, there's always going to be finger pointing. But it's how do they shift that and how do they see that? We do cultural things for us for here. to integrate that so that new employees see that. So like a new employee, they go down and they work in the OR for a day. They work as a support tech. They help turn over the rooms. They help push the patients. They get the case cards. They see the rooms set up. And then new nurses and new scrub techs and new support techs, they come into sterile processing. They work in decontam for the day. They work in the prep and pack. They work in sterilization so they can see what we do. So we kind of have a mutual respect for each other. And that's very helpful for the frontline workers. But it's when they come up, how are they welcomed into our department? Is, hey, you guys always screw this up every single time. Well, that's terrible for frontline to frontline. They're hearing it right there is you guys are doing this and the finger pointing at each other right there in the department. I've had many times where I've had to step in and say, hey, we don't need to talk about that stuff right now. Let's talk about all the positive of that, because we as the frontliners, we are the people that have to do the job right. We are the ones that have to make sure our instruments are clean. We have to make sure the indicators are in there, little steps, locks on there, all of that for the best of the patient. So then when the frontline worker starts and they're brand new, they need to know everything right off the bat. When a frontline worker starts, they have to be there and, they're learning right then and there. Some of these people we come with, no knowledge of sterile processing, and whoever's that older senior tech, they're the first person in there. I got someone in my department that has 20 plus years of sterile processing. They have gone from, this is the way I've always done it. It's just everybody's phrase. Well, I've done that for the last 20 years that way. Well, standards have changed and stuff like that. How do we teach them? And that is where they're most important. They don't want to listen to me. Brand new employees don't always want to listen to the manager. They want to hear what the staff employees are saying and what the other frontline workers. And that's why they're so important, to keep them in a positive idea for the culture to go forward.
And what's interesting too, to kind of tie this back in to the last time that you were with us a couple of years ago, that conversation, that topic was on a quality related theme as well, on really holding the line for your IUS rate and all of that conversation and process around that. So I want to ask you about that here in a second, but I just want to say that you're describing a trend and trajectory, and I want to encourage people out there that are along that spectrum. Like maybe you're not all the way where everyone in your department is all singing the same song and everybody's happy and everyone sees the vision, but there's a tipping point, and that's what you want to target. It's not 100% everybody is there. That's great. We all want to get there, but ultimately you're going to get to a place in your department where it's weird to complain and it's weird to hate on the OR and to constantly be like negative, because then you're going to be the outlier and everyone else is going to be looking at you being like, dude, like that's not who we are. That's not what we're about. Like we don't do that here. Just like what you said, right? And that's the place where it really starts getting exciting, because you start to see everyone else organically begin communicating the values, implementing that cultural shift. But we're not just talking about this, because we love culture and this is all kind of high in the sky abstract. This has concrete implications. And that's where I want to tie in your last episode and kind of get an update in your goal and drive to reduce your IUS in your facility. That's a process change that has quality implications. But talk to us about how over the last couple of years, the culture has been able to sustain that. And what about this culture? What about the collaboration that you're describing has helped impact that quality metric?
Yeah. So when we last talked, we were at 0% IUS rate. We are still currently at 0% IUS rate. Over the last 2.5 years, we've only had to flash roughly about two to three times for that whole entire time period. But that is also the culture. Our OR nurses and our scrub techs and even most of our doctors, they know we're not going to flash unless it's a true emergency. If we have the ability to make sure it is safe for the patient and they make them wait an extra 25 minutes, as long as, it's appropriate, make them wait an extra 25 minutes to have surgery, we will do that. And they understand it. And that is something that we came to as a collaborate. They know if they drop something on the floor and we don't have it available, which is common, is, hey, it's not going to be flash. You'll be getting it a little warm, but it's not going to be flash. And they know that right away. Is they'll call when you receive that phone call from the OR for a tray and it's not ready. And they're like, hey, when can we get it? They know it's not going to be flash. Everybody's feeling it now. We have travelers inside the OR right now. They're calling up and they're saying, hey, can we flash this? And we say no to them. And it's like, what do you mean we don't flash? And, it's quite funny for us when you hear their travelers on the other line say, hey, why aren't we flashing this? but that is our culture. And that is something that we push together as a department for that quality side. And that's something that, the OR really worked hard at the point of use cleaning. And that was that first step to get us there. And we still experience that first step. Is there one-offs? Of course, especially with travelers and new people coming in. But that point of use cleaning for us was that start of our quality to help us stay at that 0%. And then is that culture of it in the relationship we have. Everybody knows we're not flashing. It better be an uncircumstance or crazy circumstance that is going to have us flash. But otherwise, we're not flashing no instruments unless we really, really have to. And that's just us working together on that. They know our turnover time. Our scheduling also, who's very much important into that, they know our turnover times. They're not going to schedule something or put us in a position where we can't be successful. One of the communication things that we have with the OR, we sit down with each other every day and we go over the next day's schedule. And if we look at that schedule and we see that, hey, there's back-to-back cases and we're not going to have enough time to turn over an instrument for that next case, can we move another case in between them so that now we have the opportunity to be successful and get that ready for that third case? And that is something that we've worked hard with at SPD in here with the OR. Having those meetings. We have a 9:00 huddle meeting every single day talking about next day stuff. And then we do it again at 2:00. And then at 7 p.m. an email comes out with any extra updates and we're all on. And it has been the reason we are so successful with not flashing. I can't tell you how many times we move patient order around just so that we don't have to rush a turnover process and, put a patient at risk. We have that ability to make sure, hey, if I can switch someone in there, let's do it.
Jason, I love that story because as you talk about getting to the goal of 0% IOSS, you're kind of painting the picture of the proverbial duck that looks, calm on the surface, but underneath the water, there's a fury of activity going on, right? But everything that you mentioned about communication, about these meetings that happen, about rearranging the surgical schedule, all of those things really underline that trust, right? Through this culture process, you've earned the trust to be able to carry out all of those activities. So it isn't just a list of procedures that you went through. If you follow this recipe of these meetings, of having these scheduling practices, you will get there. You really have to have that foundation built first of trust and communication, and then build upon that all of those procedures. So relevant. It starts to get into kind of tipping the hand as to why we're talking to you today, because you may know our theme for the season is investing in instrument safety. And so this season we're talking about quality assurance. We're talking about department efficiency and workflows and things like that. So how do you see the time and effort spent to build collaborative cultures between teams fitting in with this theme of instrument safety?
Well, so just talking about the collaborative team, I'm going right back to point of use. So one of our quality measures that we have been doing here at Highland right now is we've been tracking how many dirty trays come out from decontam into the clean side. Everybody knows it happens. We make little tiny things, but with that collaboration for the point of use cleaning, like I tell new employees all the time here is when you're going to be in decontam, you're going to look at a set. I would say 95% of the time you can't tell if it's been used in the OR or not. That is how good of a job that point of use cleaning is. That is why we had in the last 9 months, we had 500 trays come through decontam dirty with either cement, bioburden, bone, anything that came through on it. We've been measuring that. Well, that was out of 80,000 trays that came through our washers. Only 500 of them are dirty. That is just not sterile processing and decontam. Yes, they're doing the frontline, doing that good job of that, but also the OR is doing that good job on the point of use cleaning. That is something that we really talked about, and that's what we're trying to drive. So now I'm trying to drive those numbers down even more. So now we're doing another initiative with the OR to talk about pre-cleaning with certain trays, because we have a tracking system that we've been filling out these quality feedbacks on. And I have exactly what trays are always the issue coming through decontam dirty. So I just sat down with the OR nurse leader and the OR educator. We went over these 5 trays. So now we're putting out an initiative. They're going to have signs in the room. Hey, this one instrument always has cement on it. It always comes through decontam with cement on it. You guys are the first use. Can you guys just hit an extra wipe on that or an extra soak on that to make sure this is extra clean for us? And immediately the OR nurse manager said, yes, let's do that. So now we've got this extra push to make sure our quality numbers are good. We are only having about 4 to 5 trays a month make it to the OR dirty. And that's awesome. That is something that we really, really push on that end. And that has to do with that first step of the OR cleaning and all the way through sterile processing on their quality end. We also have double checks in place. Some of our trays go through double checks just to look it over so that, this tray always had high bioburden. Let's get 2 sets of eyes on this every single time.
It's so funny too. I know you haven't heard the other episodes of the season yet, but this theme of that kind of pre-cleaning, pre-treatment into and the impact into these departments, I think has come up on every interview so far this season. It's just confirming exactly what you're saying. I think everybody knows how critical that stage is into every other stage in the process. If you're talking about QAing, if you're talking about like washing efficiency, if you're talking about tracking the data, like all of that ties in. So to hear you say that again, I'm hoping folks kind of start to cue in if they're not already paying attention to that pre-treatment stage, doing everything that you're talking about doing, like this is the time to start. Speaking of time to start and things to do, we are all about practical applications. We want folks who tune into the podcast to be able to take something home and do a change tomorrow, impact a change, have a conversation, start a new process, etc. What would be the 1 or 2 things that you would want anybody who listens to this interview today or, 2 or 3 years from now to take away and then take back to their department and start making positive change?
One of the things for us is, for me is for you guys to take away from it is we're one team. That is what we preach here at our hospital is we're one team. The OR and SPD, one team. We do things together. We do bowling. We're going bowling here in a couple weeks just to keep the teams together. And that is something that is really important is those relationships with each other. One of the things that I do for new employees, if we have a contamination, I will take a brand new employee into that room, go talk to the doctor, apologize to the doctor about that, and allow them to see how that works. And that is something that I really wish more people would do is we don't see the effects of that, of what happens on a contamination at a new level. Oh, I contaminated a room. Well, what happened? What are the effects, the trickle down effects of that? I'm very lucky that I had a mentor do that for me. When I first started, I made a mistake. I was a patient on the table, all of that. They had a full breakdown. And he brought me into that full breakdown, stood me in the corner and said, this is what happened. This is what happened. We don't do our job as quality. This is what happened. And I had to stand there and watch them reset up the whole entire room and break down the room for 35 minutes. It changed the way that I looked at our job. And I wish more people would get to experience those little type of things for quality is how do we change that? It also showed the OR, SPD is they care about this and they want to teach how our mistakes affect the OR and affects the patient. I think that was really something that I wish more people would do is allow newer employees to see what's going on in the OR when we make little tiny mistakes. Oh, an indicator. No big deal. Well, no, it is a big deal. Now we may have to use something else or now we have to flash something because of an indicator. Little stuff like that is really what I would like more people to see.
I love that, Jason. It's a unique kind of idea because we have heard like lots of folks out there talk about, hey, you need to get your folks onboarded and go watch a surgery, which we completely support. Great idea. But you don't hear a lot of folks like what you just said say, hey, also get them in there when it hits the fan, just so they can see the true impact. And it's kind of giving me some PTSD because I'm remembering back when I left some inserts on some Fogarty clamps and it was like a $40,000 mistake because of the tear down of the room and just all those supplies. And I'm just like, oh my goodness. Like, yeah. So
for me as a manager and, like other managers out there, one of the things that I talk about is I will never throw a frontline or an employee under the bus. I may know who did it and that doctor will want to know who did it. They're angry sometimes and they want to know somebody's head for a mistake. I always take it. I did that, sir. Or I did that, ma'am.
Yeah, that's when it's like the I am Spartacus. It's like, who is that? I am Spartacus.
And that is what I want them so that it also is so they believe in me as a leader. I'm never going to throw them under the bus. I am going to take the blame for absolutely everything. If you make that mistake in the OR, I'm the blame. But on the other side, I also don't, I don't necessarily believe in discipline for mistakes. It is also, I look at every mistake as an educational thing. Somebody, didn't know something came apart because they've never seen that instrument. So why should they be punished for not knowing that a depth gauge comes apart? Well, then how do we educate? How do you flip everything to make it an educational issue? Because there are so many instruments and so many complex instruments in our world of SPD is nobody can memorize all of them. So how do you teach them, a new employee, hey, this instrument comes apart, or, hey, you made this mistake and, yes, it costs all this stuff. Now, how do we go forward to make that so you don't make that mistake again and cost that same type of situation? And that is something that we try to preach here. We're a teaching hospital.
I mean, you're setting yourself up for your third interview, but for now, we're going to tie a bow on this one. Really appreciate your time, Jason. Like, great story, great update too. Like that conversation of the 0%, lots of folks are interested in that because they're on the other side of the spectrum, like 20%, crazy high numbers out there sometimes, but it's really cool to hear not only that you did it, but that you've sustained it and that you've done it through this cultural impact that we've been talking about today. So appreciate your time.
Absolutely. And if anybody would like to reach out about how we did that, we had a project and we have it all saved. We won an award for it and everything. I'd be glad to share all the step and work. This was a 3-year process to get to 0%. And it started before I got there and it's still going to go on after I leave one day. But if anybody wants to reach out, please feel free.
Awesome. And that was Jason Pacino, Operations Manager at Highland Hospital. Bobby, a lot of great information there. Like, we were like all over the cultural spectrum there, from the good, the bad, the high-level process, the in-the-weeds process, the people, like the leadership, into the weeds. Anything in particular that really stuck out to you today?
I don't know. As I listened to it, I've experienced both good and bad cultures as a SPD manager, and I was getting introspective, Hank, just hearing Jason's like shining example of how a leader can lead well through that and try to help bring about good change, about always trying to make his face seen in the OR and trying to build those bridges of communication. Makes me think back of some things that I could have done better. And so I think this is going to be really impactful and powerful for our people who are in the trenches right now going through it.
Yeah, that was definitely a challenge for me as well. I'm not the kind of guy who loves being in the OR. I much prefer being with my team and implementing our processes and building up and everything. But he's right. We should be there as department leaders on a regular basis doing the rounding. And that's something that our boss, Karen Owens, was just always fantastic at. Like, she was a rounder and like did a great job in our department, in the OR, all around the hospital, just ensuring that there's that open access and communication. So that's a big takeaway from me, and that's a big encouragement, I would say, for everybody out there. If you're not doing that, start doing that today. All right, well, that's going to do it for this week's show, Season 18. As a reminder, you can help support us, not by money. We don't ask for your money. We just ask for a couple of seconds of your time to subscribe to us on Apple, Amazon, Google Podcast, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or your favorite podcast application, even if you just listen to us through LinkedIn and Facebook or over on our Beyond Clean YouTube channel. You can also access bonus content for certain episodes by downloading our smartphone. Yeah, there's an app for that. There's a Beyond Clean app for iPhone or Android. You can check it out in your app store. We would love a 5-star rating and a very nice review, because your feedback is really important to the show, especially new folks that are kind of searching, like brand new to sterile processing. They want to know, hey, should I download this app to listen to the show? If you say nice things, they'll be much more likely to go tune in. If you've got any questions or would like to recommend a guest, even if it's yourself or a topic for the podcast, shoot us an email at info@beyondclean.net. On behalf of Bobby and myself, we want to thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean, and switch us over now to NPR. I'm just kidding. Go on to the next episode of Beyond Clean, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.